Hello there. It's so good to see you. Come on in and pull up a chair. I've already got the fire going. Tonight, I'm going to tell you 100 things you didn't know you missed from 1980s America until right now. So let's get started. In 1980, a loaf of bread cost 50 cents. And that wasn't just food. That was a promise that tomorrow would be manageable. You could walk into any grocery store with $5 and leave with enough to feed your family for 2 days. Gas stations had full-service attendants who cleaned your windshield without being asked. And when you pulled up, someone jogged over with a smile and called you sir or ma'am like they meant it. The average house cost $68,000. And for that price, you got real hardwood floors, a basement that stayed cool in the summer, and neighbors who borrowed sugar and actually returned it. Your front door had a key that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale, long brass with teeth that clicked when you turned it. Nobody had deadbolts because nobody needed them. Every mall had a record store with listening booths, tiny glass boxes where you could preview albums before buying them. You'd slip on oversized headphones, drop the needle on track 3, and decide if this was worth your allowance money. The guy behind the counter knew every album by heart and could recommend something based on the way you walked in. But then the compact disc hit American stores, and suddenly your entire record collection looked ancient. Those shiny rainbow discs promised perfect sound forever. No scratches, no warping in the sun. You bought your first CD player for $300, which felt like buying a spaceship. And the first album you played sounded so crisp you thought the band was hiding in your living room. Phone booths stood on every corner like tiny monuments to privacy. You fed quarters into the slot, dialed with a rotary that took forever, and if someone was inside, you waited. No rushing, no texting, just patience and the metallic echo of voices bouncing off glass walls. Long-distance calls were events you planned for, saved up for, and treasured. Television signed off at midnight with the national anthem and a test pattern that hummed like an electronic lullaby. If you stayed up past that, you were left with static and the sound of America sleeping. Late night meant reading a book, talking to your family, or staring at the ceiling and thinking, imagine that. IBM released their first personal computer, and suddenly everyone was trying to figure out what the hell to do with it. It came with 16 kilobytes of memory, which sounded enormous, and a price tag of $1,565, which felt like buying a small car. You typed simple commands on a black screen with green text, and when it worked, you felt like a wizard. Arcades were temples of neon and sound. Quarters clinked in your pocket, joysticks clicked under your palms, and Pac-Man's theme song played on an endless loop. You didn't just play games. You earned your place at the machine. High scores weren't just numbers. They were your signature carved into digital stone. Every kid had a Rubik's Cube gathering dust in their dresser. 6 colors, infinite frustration, and exactly one friend who could solve it in under 2 minutes while you watched in amazement. You peeled the stickers off when nobody was looking, then stuck them back on in the right places and called it a victory. Saturday mornings were sacred. You woke up before your parents, poured a bowl of cereal that turned the milk colors, and planted yourself 3 feet from the TV. Morning cartoons weren't just shows, they were sacred rituals. Schoolhouse Rock taught you grammar between episodes of Scooby-Doo. And somehow, education felt like entertainment. New Coke launched and died faster than a mayfly in winter. People hoarded cases of the original formula, staged protests in front of Coca-Cola headquarters, and wrote angry letters in cursive that somebody actually read. When Classic Coke returned 3 months later, America celebrated like we'd won a war. Your family owned exactly 3 things that plugged into the wall and weren't appliances: the TV, a radio, and maybe a record player. Everything else ran on batteries, muscle power, or imagination. When something broke, Dad opened it up with a screwdriver and actually fixed it, because throwing things away wasn't the default option. Movie theaters sold tickets from glass booths, and the person inside looked like they'd been there since the building opened. You bought your ticket, walked into a lobby that smelled like butter and carpet, and found a seat without reserved seating apps or assigned spots. If it was sold out, you came back tomorrow. The weather forecast came from a guy in a cheap suit pointing at a map with a stick. No Doppler radar, no computer models, just experience, intuition, and the hope that the clouds would cooperate. When he said chance of rain, you packed an umbrella and trusted his gut. Every neighborhood had a corner store run by someone who knew your name, your parents' names, and exactly which candy you'd try to steal if given the chance. You walked in with $1, spent 20 minutes deciding between bubble gum and chocolate, and walked out feeling like you'd made the most important decision of your life. Car windows went up and down with a handle you cranked by hand. No buttons, no motors, just your arm muscle and the satisfaction of actually controlling something mechanical. When it stuck halfway down in winter, you drove home with frozen ears and called it character building. The Walkman changed everything. Suddenly, music became portable, personal, and powerful. You clipped that yellow box to your belt like a badge of honor, slipped on foam headphones, and disappeared into your own soundtrack. The world kept moving, but you were living in stereo. Libraries were quiet as churches and twice as sacred. You whispered even when asking for help, wrote your name on a card catalog, and carried books home like treasure. The smell of old paper and binding glue meant knowledge was waiting, and all you needed was curiosity and a library card. The minivan was born, and suddenly every mom in America had a vehicle that could haul 8 kids, 4 soccer balls, and a week's worth of groceries without breaking a sweat. Wood paneling on the sides wasn't just decoration, it was a declaration that function mattered more than fashion. Your phone number started with 2 letters and 5 numbers, and you memorized every important one. Pizza places, friends, grandparents, they all lived in your head rent-free. If you forgot someone's number, you looked it up in a book the size of a dictionary, or called the operator and asked nicely. Polaroid cameras made every moment feel important. You aimed, pressed the button, and watched a blank square slowly reveal your life in real time. No deleting, no retaking. Just one shot, and whatever magic or disaster the light decided to give you. Those white-bordered squares lived in shoe boxes and photo albums. Physical proof that moments mattered. The mall wasn't just shopping. It was civilization under one roof. You could eat, shop, people watch, and hang out for hours without spending more than $5. The fountain in the center collected wishes and loose change, and somehow both felt equally valuable. The first cell phone call was made, but most people thought it was science fiction wrapped in a briefcase. The Motorola Dynatassi weighed 2 pounds, cost $4,000, and gave you 30 minutes of talk time before dying. You carried it like a status symbol and used it like a rare treasure. Home video games meant Atari 2600 and cartridges the size of paperback books. You blew into them when they didn't work, wiggled them until the screen stopped scrolling, and somehow convinced yourself that made perfect sense. When Pac-Man came home, the living room became an arcade. Every appliance lasted 20 years minimum. Your dishwasher, refrigerator, and washing machine weren't just purchases. They were investments in the future. When they finally died, you mourned them like old friends and bought the exact same model because why mess with perfection? Drive-in movies were still hanging on, and summer nights meant parking under the stars with a speaker hooked to your window. You brought blankets, snacks, and maybe someone special to share the bench seat. The movie was just an excuse. The real show was being young and free under an endless sky. Answering machines changed how we talked to each other. You'd come home to a blinking red light, press play, and hear voices from your day, some important, some not, all filtered through a tiny speaker that made everyone sound like they were calling from Mars. The outgoing message became performance art. You practiced it 5 times, tried to sound casual but clever, and always ended with, "Leave a message after the beep," like it was some ancient ritual. Grocery shopping meant pushing a metal cart with one wobbly wheel through aisles that smelled like floor wax and possibility. You grabbed items off shelves without scanning barcodes or checking your phone for better prices. The checkout girl knew the price of bananas by heart, and if something didn't have a sticker, she'd holler across 3 lanes until someone jogged over with the answer. Your car had an ashtray even if nobody in your family smoked. It held loose change, tiny toys, and breath mints that had been there since Carter was president. The cigarette lighter glowed orange when you pushed it in, and kids used it to burn their initials into plastic, creating artwork that smelled like melted childhood. Personal computers started showing up in schools, and suddenly typing class became the most important hour of your day. You sat at keyboards connected to monitors the size of microwave ovens, hunt and pecking your way through exercises while a teacher walked the rows like a drill sergeant. If you could type 30 words per minute without looking, you were basically ready for the future. Every kitchen had a junk drawer filled with mysteries, rubber bands, expired coupons, keys to locks that no longer existed, and a screwdriver that had fixed everything at least once. You'd dig through it looking for batteries, find 3 things you'd forgotten you owned, and somehow never actually organize it. That drawer was chaos with a purpose. Christmas lights came in big bulbs that burned hot enough to toast marshmallows. You strung them around the house in early December, and if one bulb died, half the strand went dark. Finding the dead bulb meant testing each one individually, a holiday tradition that taught patience and the value of working systems. The Challenger shuttle explosion stopped time for 73 seconds. Everyone remembers where they were. Classrooms went silent. Offices gathered around TVs, and America watched heroes disappear into blue sky and white smoke. For a moment, the future felt fragile, and space didn't seem so friendly anymore. Your neighborhood had one house with a satellite dish the size of a small moon planted in the backyard. The family who owned it became local celebrities, rumored to receive signals from exotic places like Canada and HBO. You'd walk by just to see it slowly tracking across the sky, searching for entertainment from outer space. Boom boxes were portable thunder. You slung them over your shoulder, cranked the volume to maximum, and carried your soundtrack wherever you went. The bigger the box, the cooler you were. If yours had detachable speakers, you were basically running a mobile concert. Dead batteries meant social death. School cafeterias served food on compartmentalized trays that looked like they came from a space station. Mystery meat, green beans that had given up hope, and mashed potatoes that could patch drywall. You ate it because you were 12 and hungry, and somehow it tasted better than it had any right to. Your family owned one good camera, and film cost money, so every picture mattered. You didn't take 17 shots of the same sunset. You aimed carefully, held your breath, and hoped the light was right. When you got the photos back from the drugstore, opening that envelope felt like unwrapping presents from your own life. Typewriters clicked and dinged their way through homework, love letters, and job applications. You loaded a sheet of paper, lined it up just right, and hoped you wouldn't make mistakes because correction fluid only fooled nobody. The return lever slammed with authority, announcing that another line of thought had been completed. Hair reached heights that defied physics and common sense. Girls teased their bangs into gravity-defying sculptures held in place by enough hairspray to damage the ozone. Boys grew mullets that were business in front, party in back, and pure 1980s everywhere in between. The bigger the hair, the closer to heaven. Video rental stores were libraries for entertainment. You wandered the aisles reading the backs of VHS boxes, judging movies by their covers, and hoping the film you wanted wasn't already rented. Friday nights meant racing to Blockbuster before all the good stuff disappeared, and coming home with 3 movies you'd probably fall asleep watching. Your dad owned tools that lasted decades, hammers with wooden handles worn smooth by years of honest work, screwdrivers that fit screws perfectly, and measuring tapes that snapped back with satisfying authority. When something broke, he didn't call a service. He walked to the garage, selected the right tool, and fixed it himself. Because that's what tools were for. The Berlin Wall fell, and even American kids felt the weight of history shifting. We'd grown up with Cold War cartoons and nuclear drills, but suddenly the world felt less divided. Freedom wasn't just an idea anymore. It was people with hammers and hope, turning concrete barriers into souvenirs. McDonald's Happy Meals came with toys that weren't made from recycled dreams and safety warnings. You got actual toys, cars with moving parts, puzzles that challenged your brain, and characters from movies you loved. The toy was half the reason you begged to go, and somehow a 4-piece chicken nugget meal felt like winning the lottery. Phone books were delivered to every house like thick yellow presents nobody asked for. They landed on doorsteps with a thud, weighing more than some textbooks, and somehow contained the phone number of every person in your city. You used them to look up pizza places, settle arguments about spellings, and prop up wobbly table legs. When the new one arrived, the old one went straight to the garage. Alarm clocks had 2 bells on top and a hammer that beat them like a tiny metallic drummer having a seizure. You wound them up at night, set the hands just right, and trusted that mechanical fury to drag you out of dreams at exactly 7:15. No snooze button, no gentle wake-up sounds, just pure audio violence that guaranteed you'd never oversleep again. Post-it notes changed how people remembered things. Suddenly, every surface in America was covered in little yellow squares. Fridges, computer monitors, bathroom mirrors, steering wheels. You could stick a reminder anywhere, and somehow that tiny piece of paper held more power than a diary. Don't forget became impossible when everything was sticky. Your neighborhood gas station had a mechanic who could diagnose car problems just by listening to the engine. You'd pull up, describe a weird noise using words like clunk and whir, and he'd pop the hood, poke around for 5 minutes, and tell you exactly what was wrong. No computers, no diagnostic machines, just decades of experience and ears that understood metal. Cereal boxes came with prizes buried somewhere in the middle, and every morning felt like archaeology. You'd pour carefully, listening for the rustle of plastic, then dig through flakes and marshmallows until you found treasure. Tiny toys, stickers, or temporary tattoos that made breakfast feel like Christmas morning, even in July. The Oprah Winfrey Show went national, and suddenly America had a daily dose of hope delivered at 4 p.m. She didn't just interview celebrities. She talked to real people about real problems and somehow made everyone feel like they mattered. When Oprah cried, America cried. When she laughed, living rooms across the country laughed with her. Your local bank knew your name, your parents' names, and probably your birthday. You walked in with a handwritten deposit slip, stood in a line that moved slowly, and chatted with the teller about weather or weekend plans. They counted your money by hand, stamped your passbook with a machine that sounded like a tiny printing press, and called you by name when you left. Sidewalk chalk wasn't just art supplies. It was liquid creativity that dried into masterpieces. You drew hopscotch courts that lasted until the next rain, wrote messages to friends in block letters, and somehow turned gray concrete into a canvas. Your hands stayed rainbow-colored for hours afterward, proof that imagination had been at work. The first Apple Macintosh computers arrived with a mouse that felt like holding the future. You clicked on tiny pictures called icons, dragged files around like playing cards, and somehow made a machine obey commands without typing mysterious codes. The screen showed exactly what you'd get when you printed, which felt like magic wrapped in beige plastic. Every kid had a favorite pen, maybe a Bic that clicked just right, or a felt-tip marker that smelled like artificial fruit. You'd guard it jealously, lend it reluctantly, and panic when it went missing. The way ink flowed onto paper mattered, and finding the perfect writing instrument was like discovering a piece of your personality. Roller skating rinks were discos on wheels. Mirror balls spun overhead. Music thumped through speakers the size of refrigerators, and everyone glided in circles under colored lights. You rented skates that had been worn by 1,000 other feet, laced them tight, and joined the flow of humanity rolling clockwise around a wooden track. Falling was part of the experience. Disposable cameras put photography in everyone's pocket. You got 27 shots, no do-overs, and a plastic box that you threw away after developing. Every picture was a gamble. You aimed, hoped, and waited a week to see if you captured anything worth keeping. Those little cardboard rectangles held memories you couldn't preview or delete. Your family car had an AM/FM radio with maybe 8 preset buttons, and finding a good song meant spinning the dial through static and talk shows until something decent emerged. You memorized the numbers where your favorite stations lived: 101.5, 95.7, 107.1, and somehow that felt like knowing secret codes to happiness. Grocery stores had checkout girls who could scan prices faster than any computer, punch register keys with fingers that danced, and bag your groceries like they were packing for a moon mission. They knew which bread wouldn't get squished, which eggs were fragile, and exactly how many items fit in one paper bag without tearing. Pac-Man fever infected America like a friendly epidemic. Yellow circles chomped through mazes in every arcade, restaurant, and convenience store, while kids lined up with quarters and dreams of beating the high score. The sound of Pac-Man eating dots became the soundtrack of childhood, and suddenly ghosts named Blinky and Pinky were household names. Schoolbook fairs were literary carnivals that invaded gymnasiums once a semester. Tables groaned under the weight of fresh paperbacks, their covers bright enough to see from space. You clutched crumpled dollar bills, browsed like a millionaire, and left with an armload of stories that smelled like possibility and new ink. Your hometown had one movie theater with a marquee that someone changed by hand, letter by letter, climbing a ladder with a box of plastic alphabet pieces. When a new movie came to town, half the excitement was seeing your favorite title spelled out in lights, announcing to the whole world that entertainment had arrived. Back to the Future made time travel feel possible, and suddenly every kid wanted a DeLorean and a scientist friend named Doc. The movie proved that the 1980s were the coolest time in history, so cool that people from the future would want to visit. Flux capacitors became household words, even though nobody knew what they actually did. Lunchboxes were fashion statements made of metal and covered with whatever cartoon character ruled your imagination that year. You carried sandwiches, fruit, and maybe a thermos of milk, but really, you carried a piece of your identity. The louder the graphics, the cooler you were, and a dented lunchbox meant you were tough enough to survive recess. Every neighborhood had a house where the Halloween decorations went up in September and didn't come down until Thanksgiving. Fake spiders hung from trees. Plastic skeletons danced in windows. And someone always dressed up to scare trick-or-treaters. That house became legendary, the place where Halloween lived all year long. Red Bull hadn't been invented yet, So people got energy from coffee, sugar, and the natural excitement of being alive in the 1980s. You drank Coke for breakfast without guilt, ate candy for lunch without shame, and somehow had more energy than a power plant. Artificial ingredients weren't scary, they were the future. Your family owned a set of encyclopedias that took up half a bookshelf and cost more than a used car. 24 volumes of human knowledge from A to Z, with pictures that made everything seem more important. When you needed to write a report, you hauled out the right volume, found your topic, and copied facts by hand like a medieval monk. Drive-through windows were still magical. You talked into a speaker that crackled like a radio from Mars, drove around a building, and somehow your order appeared at a window operated by someone who'd never seen your face. Fast food felt like science fiction, and getting your order right felt like winning a small miracle. MTV played music videos 24 hours a day, and suddenly songs had faces. You'd rush home from school, flip to Channel 31, and watch your favorite bands perform in 3-minute movies that were half concert, half fever dream. Music wasn't just sound anymore. It was a whole experience delivered through a television screen. Your dad's tool shed was a sacred space filled with coffee cans full of screws, coils of wire, and tools that had names you couldn't pronounce. Everything had a purpose, a place, and a story. You weren't allowed to touch anything, but sometimes he'd let you hold a flashlight while he fixed something, making you feel like the most important assistant in the world. Polaroid pictures developed like magic. You shook them gently, watched colors bloom across white squares, and witnessed moments becoming memories in real time. No waiting, no disappointment, just instant proof that life was happening and worth remembering. Those white-bordered squares were time machines disguised as photographs. Nintendo Power magazine arrived in mailboxes like a monthly treasure chest full of secrets. You'd tear off the plastic wrapper, flip through glossy pages covered in game maps and cheat codes, and suddenly feel like you had insider knowledge. The tips and tricks weren't on the internet because there wasn't an internet. They lived in print. And owning that magazine meant you could help your friends beat levels they'd been stuck on for weeks. Your town had one computer store run by a guy who looked like he'd stepped out of a science fiction movie. He wore thick glasses, spoke in acronyms you didn't understand, and could explain the difference between 64K and 128K of memory, like he was discussing rocket science. When your family finally bought a computer, he set it up personally, showed you how to load programs from floppy disks, and somehow made the future feel manageable. Garage sales were community events disguised as capitalism. You'd wake up early Saturday morning, grab a coffee, and drive through neighborhoods following handmade signs taped to telephone poles. Every driveway became a museum of someone else's life. Exercise bikes that had given up hope, board games with half the pieces missing, and clothes that had survived disco and lived to tell about it. Michael Jackson's Thriller album was everywhere, spinning on the turntables, blasting from boom boxes, and teaching white kids how to moonwalk on kitchen linoleum. You practiced the moves in your bedroom mirror, wore one sequined glove to school, and somehow convinced yourself you looked just like the king of pop sliding across your parents' hardwood floors. Your family doctor made house calls when you were really sick, arriving with a black leather bag that looked like it belonged in a museum. He'd take your temperature with a glass thermometer, listen to your chest with a stethoscope that felt cold against your skin, and somehow make you feel better just by being there. Real doctors knew your name, your medical history, and probably your favorite flavor of cough syrup. Church bells rang every Sunday at exactly 10 a.m., and you could hear them from 6 blocks away. They weren't just marking time, they were calling the community together, reminding everyone that some things were bigger than daily worries. Whether you attended or not, those bells meant Sunday morning, family breakfast, and a world that still believed in taking one day off. The Statue of Liberty turned 100, and America threw the biggest birthday party in history. Fireworks exploded over New York Harbor, tall ships sailed past Ellis Island, and somehow a green copper lady reminded everyone what freedom was supposed to feel like. You watched it on TV, felt proud to be American, and didn't need anyone to explain why. Vending machines dispensed glass bottles of Coca-Cola for 50 cents, and the bottles stayed cold in metal racks that looked like they could survive nuclear war. You'd slide your quarters into the slot, pull a bottle from the cooler, and pop the cap on a built-in opener. That first sip burned with carbonation and sweetness, and somehow tasted better than any soda that came after. Your bedroom had wood-grain contact paper covering half the furniture, and somehow that fake wood pattern made everything feel more official. Dressers, desks, and even toy boxes got the treatment. Sticky plastic that bubbled if you weren't careful, but transformed cheap particle board into something that looked almost grown up. IBM launched their personal computer with an advertising campaign that asked, "What's a computer?" Most people honestly didn't know, but they sensed something big was happening. You'd see them in office windows, beige boxes with tiny screens showing green text, and wonder if regular people would ever need such mysterious machines. Paperboy Roots were small businesses run by kids who understood responsibility better than most adults. You'd wake up at 5 a.m., load canvas bags with newspapers that smelled like ink and possibility, and ride your bike through sleeping neighborhoods. Collecting money meant knocking on doors, making change from a coin belt, and learning that some customers tipped better than others. Every kitchen had a spice rack filled with bottles that hadn't moved since the Carter administration. Oregano, basil, and mysterious seasonings your mom bought once for a recipe she never made again. The bottles had metal tops that unscrewed with a satisfying click, and somehow even old spices made cooking feel more serious and adult. Dirty Dancing proved that summer camp romance could change your life, and suddenly every teenage girl wanted to learn the lift. You practiced with pillows, convinced your dad to be Patrick Swayze for 5 minutes, and somehow believed that the right dance partner could solve all your problems. Nobody Put Baby in a Corner became a battle cry for girls who felt invisible. Your family owned exactly one cordless phone, and it was a miracle of modern technology. You could walk from room to room while talking though the reception got fuzzy if you went too far from the base. The battery lasted about 30 minutes, and somehow that limitation made every conversation feel more precious and focused. Shopping malls had photo booths that captured your life in 4 black and white squares for $2. You'd squeeze into a tiny curtained box with your friends, feed quarters into the slot, and pose for pictures that came out looking like mug shots from a very happy prison. Those strips of photos lived in wallets and lockers, proof that friendship was worth documenting. The first .com domain was registered, but most people thought the internet was something that happened to other people in other places. You heard rumors about computers talking to each other through phone lines, but it sounded like science fiction wrapped in telephone wire. The future was coming, but it felt safely far away. The 1980s weren't just a decade. They were a promise that life could be simple, genuine, and somehow magical without trying too hard. Every moment had weight because nothing was instant. Every connection mattered because they took effort to maintain, and every memory stuck because you couldn't delete it later. Maybe we didn't know we were living in the good times, but looking back, those 10 years gave us something no algorithm can replicate. The feeling that being human was enough. Well now, look at that. The fire's burning low, and we've talked the evening away. I hope some of these old stories made you smile, maybe helped you understand why your grandpa gets that faraway look sometimes when I'm fiddling with the radio or digging through that junk drawer in the kitchen. These weren't just things we had. They were the rhythm of our days, the background music of growing up when the world felt a little smaller and a lot more manageable. You come back and see me soon, you hear? I've got plenty more stories where those came from. And next time, maybe I'll tell you about the day we got our first microwave, or what it was like when everyone thought computers were just a fad that would never catch on. If there's anything you want me to tell you about, you just let me know. Take care of yourself out there in that busy world of yours, and remember, sometimes the old ways weren't wrong, just different. Good night, kiddo. Drive safe going home.